Hi, and welcome to Quilt Street. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras.
And I'm Rhonda Lother.
And today we are talking about tools and notions that you need to get started as a quilter, right?
Yes.
Now, there are a lot of things that you can get as you get more advanced, right?
Right.
But we're talking about beginning quilting here, and these are just the basic tools that modern patterns are written assuming that you have. Because if we wanted to take it really old school, you could just get by with a pair of scissors and a spool of thread and a needle the way they did it, gosh, what, 50, 60 years ago at this point?
But nowadays there are so many tools that will make your life so much easier for assembly, sewing, and accuracy, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we will start with, well, the biggest thing we have right here in front of us, which is cutting mats.
Yes, cutting mat is very important. You want to get one that fits your space, as large as you can that fits your space. It's important you don't get one so large, though, that it hangs off the edge of your table. You don't want that because you never want to try to cut with on a mat that's not firmly grounded on a table.
Right. They have some flexibility to them, so they're not as strong as a tabletop.
Correct.
And they're self-healing, right?
But you can just cut right on them. The blade won't hurt them.
And as you can see, they're gridded. They have measurement markings on them. Some of them have nice angled, 45-degree angles and things along those lines. Why don't you talk about the advantage of having these dual-colored mats?
These Quilter Select mats are great. They have two sides. One is light, and one side is light, and the other side is dark. And just choose the one that works best for you. Whatever you can see whatever you can see well on is what you want to use.
And that might vary depending on the value of the fabric that you're cutting.
That's true.
So, yeah. And so speaking of cutting, let's talk about the rulers that we use.
Yes, the first ruler I ever had as a quilter was a 6-inch by 24-inch ruler. This size is great for cutting strips from a regular length of fabric. And of course now they come out with 6.5 and by 24-inch ruler, which I really love because if you're trying to get a 6-inch finished size, that really gives you the extra little half-inch you need to do that.
Yeah, when I started buying them, they didn't have the 6.5.
Same.
It was just the 6. So these are, I would say, if you were going to buy just one, this is probably either the 6.5 or the 6-inch widths. But this 24-inch length, it's going to offer you a lot of options. Again, cutting long strips, borders, smaller sizes. Having said that, though, there are rulers, I'll take these over here.
Sure.
There are rulers, though, that are going to make your life a lot easier. And until I got my hands on one of these square rulers, I didn't know how great they were. And they are so nice to have.
This 12.5-inch size, and again, back in the day, they only came in 12 inches. Love the 12.5 because if you have a large quilt block you're making, this is perfect for squaring up your block, getting it nice and trim and making sure everything is accurate.
Yeah, and you can use it to cut smaller squares or rectangles. They're just so convenient, but even more convenient for some people. Again, it depends on your preference, right?
Your project or your preference?
This is more your favorite size, right?
It is. I kind of like the smaller ones. This one is 10 inches, and when I'm cutting, I can kind of get my hands around this size a little better. And again, this will cover a wide range of quilt blocks. You have the lines that will help you in cutting angles. All that's great. And I even like the smaller square. This one's great. Again, 6.5 inches. You really can't go wrong. There are so many quilt shapes that use say you work with 4-inch squares or 4-inch patches, 6-inch. These are great because they're going to cover your fabric, make it stay still and in place.
Yeah.
Really important.
And you don't need to get all 3 sizes,
No,
right?
you don't.
And they're just so helpful.
They are.
And then we have, for instance, one example of a triangular ruler, which is maybe a little bit more advanced, right?
True. The more you quilt, the further you get in your quilting journey. Say you're going to make a really specialty quilt that uses triangles. There are specialty rulers available. This one is a great option. This is a 60-degree equilateral triangle. This one is great for cutting triangles of any size up to, it looks like 8.5, 9 inches. And we do have a quilt on Quilt Street that uses this triangle. The more you go, the further you are in your journey, the more rulers you can find.
And they make them in 45-degree, 30-degree. There's a wide variety.
There are.
Yeah. So when you end up with a lot of rulers, what are you going to do with them all?
This is great. This is it's a wooden storage. You can just stack your rulers in here. Put the smaller ones in first, however you want to do. This is a great way to store your rulers, because even though these are nice and thick, they still will not survive sometimes if you sit on one or step on one. Ask me how I know that. I've made the mistake of getting up to go to my ironing board and put a ruler in my chair, and then because they're clear, I just sat right on it and it broke. But they're close to indestructible, but it's really better to keep them in some kind of a storage space where they're not going to get hurt.
Right, and it keeps them safe and out of your way, and you're not just throwing them on the floor.
And you can find them. It's really, you don't want to put them where you can't find them either.
That's true. So now we need to talk about the most important thing when cutting fabric, the cutter, the rotary cutters. And these have been pretty much the industry standard for over 30 years now.
Yes.
And they look like a pizza cutter, and they come in a variety of sizes, and these are the two sizes that most quilters use, right?
They come in 45 millimeter and 60 millimeter. These are the two most common sizes. And honestly, it's just what feels most comfortable in your hand. A 60 millimeter will cut through more layers of fabric. Sometimes they say 6 to 8 layers. This one, maybe up to 4 layers. But again, if you can, try to hold one and see what fits well in your hand. I know that personally I like to use a 60 millimeter, but you prefer this size, right?
I did. I used to use a 60 millimeter, but then I tried a 45 and it just worked for me better. So
just use what works for you. And the main thing to keep in mind is that all cutters will have a safety feature. This has a button that releases. I'm going to flip this over for a moment. You can see it has a slide, and that's what slides this plastic part over. Once this is open, you can cut along this edge that way, and we'll cover cutting again. But the main thing, make sure anytime you put your quilt top away or you set this down, always close it. Make sure that safety feature is engaged, because these blades are very, very sharp. And you will have to cut yourself once before you never forget again.
That's just a muscle memory thing, a habit that you just want to get into, is whenever you're not actively using it, just, put it into safety mode.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And those fit nicely into that little...
They do. This has a great little cubby hole that holds our cutters just wonderfully.
And earlier I mentioned scissors. We do still use scissors.
We do.
Not as much as we use rotary cutters, but we do still use scissors.
These are I guess more commonly known as dressmaker shears. But as quilters, we use these often to cut batting, to trim down the quilt backing. Right. Sometimes if I'm doing an applique, or if I want to center a certain design, I'll rough cut around it first with scissors and then trim it up to the size I want with a rotary cutter. So, but again, you want to make sure these are nice shears that nobody else in your family uses.
I was about to say.
I love that these are purple, because you can tell your family, don't use the purple scissors.
The one thing you don't want to cut with them is
paper. Never. It will dull them.
Punishable. Punishable offense.
Absolutely.
And then we also have these little applique
They
scissors.
are. If you're doing an applique project and you need to trim something, you'll notice these have a little duck bill right here. And mainly that's when you go in to cut on applique. This separates your fabric, the bottom layer, and just keeps you from making a miscut. Because once you make a miscut in applique, you will just weep if you have to go back and do that. So again, if you're brand new starting out, you may not need these, but I highly recommend these if you're going to do applique work.
Right. And a couple of other cutting implements or separating thread implements. We've got snips.
Yes.
And these are just really nice to have. They do make just cutting the threads, if you're chain piecing, for instance, or cutting loose threads from the ends of your units. How else do you use them, or why do you like them?
I keep them always by my sewing machine, because I'm constantly picking these up, and I prefer thread snips to scissors for the simple reason it's much more difficult to cut your fabric with them.
Yeah.
So for example, if I've chain pieced several things together, I just want to quickly snip between those. And these really make it possible with very little risk of my cutting the fabric.
Right, right. And the one thing that none of us want to have to admit that we use,
but we do,
but we all do, is the seam ripper. It happens to the best of us. It happens to everybody. And you're going to just need to rip a seam occasionally. So get a seam ripper, and they come in a wide variety of manufacturers. And
They do. This one looks like it's ergonomic to fit in your hand well. Again, if you can, just try to hold one or two and see what feels good to you. But another valuable tool in your toolbox.
yeah, you'll need it. Sorry, but you will. So now, next, let's talk about pins. Lots of different types of pins. You don't need to get them all, at least not to begin with.
No, we're just showing you a variety so you can decide what might work best for you.
And a pin cushion of sorts. Now, this is not a cushion. This is a magnetic pin pad.
Yes.
Magnetic pad. I don't know exactly.
One great advantage to these, if you happened to knock your pins over and they hit the floor, you pin things over and they fall out, you can just simply wave this over and it picks them up very quickly so that nobody steps on them.
Right.
Again, won't know from experience from that, but...
Now, and the pins that we have on them are just your classic sort of, I don't know if these are glass header or plastic head pins, but I've heard some quilters say that they love the glass head beads because then they can iron and they're not going to melt.
Good point.
But if nothing else, these rounded ends make it easier just to grab.
It does. It really does. And speaking of that, I really like these flathead pins that have shapes to them. One thing I tend to do, I like to pin at an angle. I do not sew over my pins. So I pin at an angle, and having a flat shape on the top makes it much easier for me to grab it and pull it out before I get to it on the machine.
Yeah. And we have a couple of other examples out here. These are silk pins, right?
Yes.
They're very fine.
Very thin and lightweight.
Yeah.
And, of course, safety pins. And we'll talk about these again when we get to basting your quilt, but that's mainly the time when I use them. How about you?
Pretty much, yeah. I don't use them in the piecing
I
part.
don't
It's
either.
just for basting before quilting.
Right.
Usually. So, yeah, just get yourself a nice set of pins and you'll be good to go as far as that's concerned. And what goes with pins but
Needles.
So here we have a selection of needles. Now, we're assuming that you're going to be piecing with a machine, as most quilters do these days.
Yes.
Not that you can't stitch by hand, because of course you can, but you're going to want to get machine needles, again, made by a variety of manufacturers, and they do come in specific sizes for what you're using them for. Fortunately, you can get by with a universal needle.
Correct. I believe that universal needles and quilting needles are the same size. They're size 11 or 12 sometimes. Often you'll get a pack of needles with your machine if you buy a new machine. These came from Bernina, and they're Schmetz, all different kinds. But mainly you want a universal or quilting needle for your machine.
And you will need some hand needles.
Yes.
Could be not even applique, but if you're going to finish a binding, for instance, it's a good thing to have a few basic hand needles on hand. So what do we have in here? Well, straw needles. We're just going to show you a couple of different sizes so you can see that there's unlike sewing machine needles, which come in a standard length, hand needles come in a wide variety of lengths. I don't even know if you can see these on camera. They are so
They're really
thin.
long. They're long and thin.
And I have known people who really like using these for finishing that hand binding.
Yes. There are a lot of appliqueurs use them because they are so thin. They use it to turn the fabric under as they sew. But again, they're also great for binding as well if you like that length.
Right. Then we also have, these are quilting needles, also known as betweens, and these are specifically made for hand quilting. And then we have some sharps, which are also used for applique. These are just a few examples of all the types of hand needles that are out there.
I like sharps, especially if it says they have a large eye, because I sometimes have a hard time threading a needle. But I do like a large eye.
Speaking of which,
this is a great little tool. It has a light with it also, so if you really can't see, it's a little needle threader. You can put the thread through here, run it through your needle and pull it out. But I love that it has a little light right here that kind of light up that area and make it a lot more visible.
Yeah. After a certain age, our eyes thank us for that.
They really do.
And then it doesn't hurt to have a thimble on hand. You'll be surprised when you might need one. These are, again, a few different varieties. This is a nice metal one that actually, here, you model it because it looks so pretty on your hand.
I love this needle because it has an opening in the back. If you have nails like I do, when you put the thimble on, you have a nice ridged edge here, but your nail is not jammed up in an enclosed thimble.
Yeah.
It's exposed and it's not going to damage your nail.
And it also offers ventilation.
It does.
But then are there other thimbles in addition to just the basic traditional metal thimble that we're all familiar with?
This one, I believe, is plastic, and again, it has a little ridged edge for you to push the needle with. I use a thimble with binding mostly when I'm putting hand stitching my binding on. This is another one very similar to the metal. This is a rubber thimble, and it has the same feature. You can kind of pull it on a little bit. It's a little nice and snug, and again, you have room for your nail to come out, but you've still got a nice little grippy area right there.
I've never used one like that before.
Sometimes I put a rubber thimble on my thumb, like so. I may have it turned the wrong way. A lot of times when I'm doing binding or I'm trying to pull some thread through, I like to have some kind of a grip right here. It helps me pull that needle and thread through. So these are all great thimbles.
Yeah. Here, I'll take this. Woo! You don't want to spill all these needles. I'll let you take care of that.
Thank you.
And our last tool and notion that we need to talk about is one that you're going to spend a lot of time doing when you're quilting, and that is ironing. If you didn't know, now you know. You're going to spend a lot of time ironing as a quilter. And this is just a small, little, petite tabletop set that we have
Yes, it's a little wool pressing mat. It holds a lot of heat, and it's great to have next to your sewing area. I like to have a little small iron like this too. Of course, you can use a regular iron. I have a regular iron in my sewing room also. I have a regular ironing board and a full-size iron. But especially when I'm making the blocks, I don't want to be getting up and down from my seat all the time to do that. So it's great to have just a little pressing area nearby and a small iron where you can just press as you go, press those seams, and just keep going.
This is one of those things that if I got it, I'd wonder how I ever lived without it.
Exactly.
As it is right now, I'm still the one who gets up from her sewing machine, goes over to the ironing board, presses, comes and sits back down.
Well, it's probably a lot better for you than sitting all that time too. So
it definitely keeps you active,
It
you know.
does.
But so you can do that, right? As you've said before, you're a material girl.
I am.
You like to have your notions. And,
I love my products.
Yes,
I love
yes.
notions. I like to have everything I might need.
well, this is really helpful, and those are basically the basic tools
That's right.
that we think that you need as a beginning quilter. There's a ton more product out there. Try not to get overwhelmed. Take your time, try out a couple of different products. For instance, when it comes to needles, they're really not that expensive, so it's easy to try out a pack. If it doesn't work for you, try out something else.
Absolutely. And if there's a needle you don't like anymore, pass it to a quilting friend. They might just love it.
They will love it. Well, that's all we have for today. Next time, we're going to be talking about fabric.